My name is Ethan Miller, but if you'd seen me a few years ago, you probably would have looked the other way. I was just another street kid, one of those the city learns to ignore. I used to sleep on the wet sidewalks of New York, feeling the concrete colder than the disgust in people's eyes. I got used to living among leftover food and broken promises. I had nothing, no hope, not even a name that meant anything to anyone. But I remember the first time I saw him, Richard Callahan, the millionaire, a man who, to most people, was the definition of success, power, and arrogance. To me, that morning, he was just another person crossing the street without even noticing I existed. And in that moment, I promised myself that one day, somehow, I'd make him see me. Fate, however, had harsher plans, because before I could become someone to him, I had to become his savior. And trust me, no one stays indifferent to the person who saves their life. Not even a man like Richard Callahan. That morning was colder than usual. The wind cut between the buildings, dragging dead leaves and the bitter smell of wet asphalt. I curled up inside my old coat, or what was left of it. My fingers were turning purple. New York's cloudy sky felt heavy on my shoulders. People rushed past as always, eyes glued to their phones, quick steps, hearts closed. And that's when I saw him again. There he is, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. Richard Callahan, the man everyone called untouchable. Custom suit, polished shoes, a Swiss watch shining discreetly on his wrist. But what stood out the most was his gaze. Cold, indifferent, the look of someone who had decided the world belonged only to the strong, to the powerful, to those who could pay. And me, I was none of those things. "Mr. Callahan, please, just some change," I yelled, moving toward him. He didn't stop. He didn't even look at me. "Please, I'm hungry." "Just a coin, man," I begged, following his steps. This time he stopped, but not to help me. He turned his face slowly, looking at me like you'd look at something dirty on the ground. "Get out of my way, kid." Those words cut deeper than the morning wind. I stood there, frozen, feeling everyone's eyes weigh on me. But no one said anything. No one ever did. He walked away, and I stayed, invisible, like always. "Why do I even try?" I whispered, sitting back down on the sidewalk. That's when I felt someone sit beside me. Not common. People didn't come close, but this person was different. "You shouldn't follow him, Ethan," said the soft, almost broken voice. It was Sarah, a street girl like me, maybe a year or two older. Brown hair, dirty, tied in a messy bun. Her eyes sad, but still alive. "One day he'll notice me, Sarah." "One day," I said, staring at the ground. "Why? He doesn't care about anyone." Maybe I'll make him care." She sighed, defeated. "I don't get you." "Neither do I." We stayed silent, the kind of silence only people from the streets understand. It's not peace, it's giving up. Suddenly, a loud noise shattered the moment, screeching brakes, shouts, tires skidding. "What was that?" Sarah jumped up, scared. "There!" I pointed, running. At the corner, a scene I'll never forget. Richard Callahan was on his knees in the street trying to get up. A black car, out of control, was speeding straight at him. Everything felt like slow motion. People screamed, but no one moved, no one except me. "Richard!" I screamed without thinking. I ran like I'd never run before. My heart pounded in my ears, the smell of burning rubber, the heat of the engine coming closer, and then impact. I threw my body against his. A second before the car passed, we fell onto the sidewalk. I landed on top. He stunned. The car vanished around the corner. Silence. You saved me?" His voice came out weak, broken. I gasped for breath, trying to get up. "Yeah, looks like I did." He looked at me. For the first time. But it wasn't the same gaze as before. Something had changed. Something in the millionaire's cold eyes had cracked. Sarah came running. Ethan, are you okay?" I smiled. even with the pain in my body. I think so. For the first time, I think so. Richard stayed motionless, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you do that?" I just answered, "Because sometimes even someone with nothing still has a heart." The silence that followed was heavier than any word. And there, that cold morning, on New York's dirty asphalt, the millionaire who had despised me, needed me, and saw me, but I didn't know. That was just the beginning. The hospital was white, too white, the kind of place that makes you feel dirty just by being there. I felt out of place, like a shadow in a place where only the bright are allowed in. But for some reason I didn't even understand. I was there, lying on an old stretcher with a thin blanket that felt more like a curtain from an abandoned hospital. Across the room, him, Richard Callahan, sitting, impeccable as always. Even after the accident, his suit still looked more expensive than anything I'd see in a lifetime. But his gaze wasn't the same. Silence. How are you feeling?" he asked without looking at me. It took me a second to realize he was talking to me, like someone who got hit by a car and saved at the same time. He took a deep breath. He looked uncomfortable. "You saved my life," I noticed. Silence again, just the sound of a heart monitor beeping in the next room. "This doesn't make sense." His voice was almost a whisper. "What doesn't make sense?" He finally looked at me. And in that moment I understood Richard Callahan was broken, not on the outside, on the inside, something no one saw, something I now saw. "I wouldn't have done the same for you." "I know." He lowered his eyes. He looked ashamed. "Why did you do it?" "Because I'm not you." Another silence, heavier. He stood up slowly, lowered his gaze like he was trying not to feel small. "I can pay you." "What?" "Money, whatever you want. You saved my life. I'll pay. A check, a deal, anything." I looked at him. For a long time, and for the first time I laughed, not out of mockery, out of pity. "Do you really think money solves everything?" "In my world, yes." "Then maybe it's time to leave your world." He stood still. Sarah walked into the room. Her eyes on Richard were pure fear. "Ethan, are you okay?" "Better now, Sarah." Richard turned his face, looking at Sarah for a moment. His eyes changed. Not pity, but doubt. "Who is she?" "Someone like me. Invisible." "Not anymore." "You do? What do you mean?" I asked, suspicious. He took a deep breath, stepped closer to me, slowly, like every step was a confession. "From now on, you're not invisible anymore." Sarah squeezed my hand, confused. I could only ask, "And what does that mean?" He hesitated. "It means you're coming with me." Silence exploded in the room. The sound of the heart monitor sped up. "What do you mean, with you?" Sarah asked nervously. "I'm taking you both off the streets." "Why?" I asked. "Because I owe you a life. And what do you expect in return?" "Nothing." I didn't believe him. Sarah, even less. But something in that man who once looked at me like I was trash, now felt honest. "Think about it. You don't have to answer now." He turned to leave. But before crossing the door, he said something that echoed in the room. "Sometimes, the hardest debt to repay is the one without a price." And he left. I stared at the closed door, feeling the weight of a choice that I knew would change everything. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "Ethan, what are we going to do?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I'd never been in a place like that. The Callahan mansion felt more like a fortress than a home. High walls, automatic gates, cameras in every corner, and silence. Not the peaceful kind, the controlled kind. Sarah walked clinging to me, her eyes wide. Every step we took across the polished marble floor echoed like a warning. We didn't belong there. "Ethan," she whispered, almost breathless, Are we sure about this? No, I answered without looking at her. The butler, a tall, stern-faced man, led us into the main hall. It was enormous, paintings of faces that seemed to have forgotten how to smile, unlit fireplaces, and the sharp scent of polished wood. Everything screamed wealth and loneliness. Then he appeared. "Welcome," Richard said, descending the staircase slowly, like he owned time itself, wearing another suit, but that look, still broken. "Why did you bring us here?" I asked directly, my voice harsher than I felt. He stopped in front of us. He looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just more human. "Because I've decided to repay my debt." Sarah squeezed my hand. I could feel her fear. "No one helps without expecting something in return, Callahan." He said nothing, just walked to the large window, staring at the city outside. I had a son. That silenced us. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. 4 years ago. He died. A car accident. Same corner, where you saved me." The silence in the room grew heavy. My heart raced. I was supposed to die with him. Sarah took a step back. "Why? Are you telling us this?" I asked, suspicious. He turned slowly, his eyes wet, but his voice steady. "Because when you saved me, I saw his eyes. In you." I trembled. "I'm not your son. I know, but maybe I need to believe I can save someone, even if it's too late." Sarah couldn't take it. "You think just because you're rich, you can buy people to fill your emptiness?" she shouted, tears in her eyes. Richard stood still, his gaze at her. It wasn't anger, it was acceptance. "Maybe, but I'd rather try than stay alone." The words lingered. I held Sarah, trying to calm her. "What do you want, Callahan?" He took a deep breath. "I want you to stay here." "This house is too big for ghosts." Sarah shook her head, desperate. "No, Ethan, this is wrong. It's wrong." She ran from the room. I stayed, frozen. Richard looked at me. "If you leave now, I won't offer again. And if I stay, what happens to me? You'll have something you never had, a chance." Time stopped. The ticking clock on the wall marked each second as a choice. So I asked, "And what happens if I trust you?" He hesitated, then said, "I don't know. Maybe we'll find out together." And then the door slammed behind Sarah, and I stayed there, torn between the street and the abyss that was that man. The following days were strange. Sarah and I stayed in the mansion, not by choice, but because maybe for the first time in our lives, the fear of the streets felt bigger than the fear of the unknown. She barely spoke to me. That first morning, I woke up in a room so large that my own breathing echoed. White walls, linen curtains. But nothing there smelled like home. It was a beautiful place, and empty. I went downstairs for breakfast. The table was absurd. Breads, exotic fruits, juices I didn't even know existed. But I couldn't eat. Richard was already seated. Impeccable, as always. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, emotionless. "You really think someone like me could sleep here?" He stayed silent. Sarah entered soon after, swollen eyes, contained anger. She sat far from me, didn't touch anything. The silence between the three of us was heavier than the marble in that house. Suddenly, Richard dropped his silverware. The metallic sound startled us. "I don't want you to feel trapped." "And are we free?" Sarah snapped sarcastically. He took a deep breath. "You can leave if you want, right now." We didn't move. "But if you stay, I have rules." Sarah scoffed. "Knew it. Always strings attached." Richard stared at her. "Work for me, here, at the company." "As employees?" I asked, suspicious. "As apprentices." I laughed, not from joy, from irony. "Apprentices of what?" "Of how to survive in my world." Sarah stood furious. "We're back to the same deal, buying our dignity." Richard said nothing, but his eyes held something I still couldn't decipher. "Why us?" I finally asked. "You could choose anyone." He answered, flatly, "Because you have nothing to lose." That sentence hurt. Sarah left the room. I stayed. "And if—" my voice cracked. "If I say yes?" Richard looked at me, serious. "Then I promise to make you into someone no one will ignore." The silence was louder than any scream. After long seconds, I asked, "And you think that's enough to repay your debt to me?" He didn't look away. "No, but it's the best I know how to do." His words hung in the air, cold and real. That morning, between the mansion's gold and the wounds of the street, I understood something. I could leave, but where would I go back to? Sarah was on the balcony, crying. I sat beside her. I said yes. She looked at me, betrayed. "Why?" "Because I don't want to die invisible." She cried even more. And in that house, where no one had cried in years, her tears were the only real sound. 2 weeks, 2 long weeks since I'd accepted the deal. Now I had new clothes, an access badge, and an ID card that read Ethan Miller, administrative intern. But the mirror still showed me the same street kid. At Callahan Corp, I was a stranger dressed like a businessman. People looked at me like I was a glitch in the system, but no one dared to question me. After all, I was under the owner's wing. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said every night at the mansion. "He's shaping you into his image, Ethan." "What should I do then? Go back to the alley?" "At least in the alley. You were you." Her words haunted me. And that morning, riding the mirrored elevator of Callahan's skyscraper, I thought, who was I really? The doors opened on the 40th floor. There he was, Richard on his glass and steel throne. "Come in," he said without looking at me. I obeyed. He kept writing, cold, methodical, but I noticed something. His hands trembled slightly. "Something wrong?" I dared to ask. He paused, looked at me, but didn't answer. "Why did you bring me here today?" I pushed. He took a deep breath. "Are you ready for your first lesson?" "What lesson?" He stood. "How losing someone teaches more than any success." I didn't understand. Then the door opened. A woman walked in, tall, impeccable, eyes of ice. "Ethan, this is Victoria Hayes, company's chief legal officer," Richard said. "The street kid," she said bluntly. "Ex-street kid," I corrected, trying to sound stronger than I felt. She smiled faintly. "Time will tell." Richard looked at me, serious. "Today your task is simple. Listen." Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking on the floor. "This boy, Richard, doesn't belong in this world." "Maybe that's why he needs to learn faster than anyone," he replied, flat. I felt like a trophy, or worse, a project. Victoria continued. "We're starting staff cuts. Need final approval." My heart froze. "Cuts?" I asked. 220 employees, gone by the end of the month," she said, like talking about numbers, not people. I looked at Richard. "And you're okay with this?" "It's necessary," he replied. "But they're families," Victoria chuckled. "You think a company's a charity?" My fists clenched. You're not the man I saved." Richard stayed silent. "Maybe I never was," he finally said. I stood up. "I can't be part of this." "Then you've failed your first lesson," Victoria said. I walked out. But before the door closed, I heard Richard say something that hurt more than any insult. "Sometimes becoming someone means losing a part of yourself." And at that moment, I realized I was starting to hate the man who owed me his life. I didn't go back to the mansion that night. I walked the streets until the sun began to rise, and the more I walked, the more lost I felt, because deep down I knew Richard hadn't tricked me. I let myself be tricked. When I finally returned, Sarah was waiting at the gate. "Where were you?" Her voice trembled, more with fear than anger, trying to remember who I am. She stepped closer, eyes red from worry. "Ethan, come back with me. Let's get out of here now." I looked at her. "To where, Sarah?" "We have nowhere to go. To anywhere that doesn't force us to become monsters." Silence. Her tears hurt more than any blow, but I couldn't move anymore. "I'm already part of this. I can't leave now." She shoved me. "Then he's won." "It's not about him," I yelled. She went silent, shocked. "No? Then tell me, Ethan, who are you trying to save, him or yourself?" I couldn't answer. She stepped back, defeated. "I won't watch you destroy yourself again, Sarah." But she was already walking away. And for the first time, I let her go. Alone, I entered the mansion. The silence felt bigger, heavier. When I reached my room, Richard was there, sitting in the armchair, waiting for me. "Where is she?" he asked. "She left." He nodded as if he already knew. "I warned you." "Warned me about what?" "That the world demands choices. You either build or destroy." "And who did you destroy to get here?" I asked, anger rising. "Everyone." His answer froze me. He stood slowly, his voice tired. "And now I'm alone. Is that what you want for your life?" "I don't know what I want." "Then let me show you." "Why?" I asked. "Why do you care so much about me?" He hesitated, and then said, "Because maybe you're the last thing keeping me from becoming a complete monster." I stepped back, feeling the weight of that confession. "And you think I can save you?" "No, but I hope you try." I stood there, silent. He placed his hand on my shoulder. The first time he'd touched me without arrogance, without control. "Tomorrow you go back to the company, and you decide whether you want to be my heir." "Heir?" I repeated, not believing it. "Yes, I no longer have a son." And he left the room, leaving me broken. I sat down on the floor and cried, like the street kid I never stopped being. The next morning, I stared at my reflection for a long time. I no longer knew who I was looking at. Suit, tie, hollow eyes, empty soul. Richard waited for me at the company entrance. The black car. The silent driver. I got in, not knowing if this was an escape or a prison. "Are you ready?" he asked, emotionless. "No one's ready to sell their soul, Richard." He didn't reply. The whole day was a parade of numbers, contracts, lawyers. Victoria smiled when she saw me. "Welcome to the winning side of the war, Ethan." I said nothing. Hours later, in the glass office, Richard looked at me, serious. "If you accept, you'll have everything. But you'll lose any chance of being just a normal boy again." I took a deep breath. "And if I refuse, then you go back to the streets, and someday you'll hate me for not accepting. Maybe I already hate you." He didn't deny it. "You decide." Before I could say anything, the door burst open, Sarah, breathless, desperate. "Ethan!" she cried. I jumped up, heart racing. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous." She ignored my concern. "You need to know. He lied to you." "Sarah, not now." But she didn't stop. "Ethan, listen. The accident. The day you saved him. It wasn't an accident." I froze. Richard stayed perfectly still. "What do you mean?" I asked, breathless. Sarah looked at him, tears and fury in her eyes. "That car, the hit and run, all of it, it was staged." "This is insane," I said, feeling the ground vanish under me. "No, Ethan, he planned everything, including you." Silence. Richard said nothing. I looked at the man I once called a monster, and who now might be worse. "Tell me it's a lie." My voice cracked. Richard breathed heavily. "I needed you to believe you owed me." My soul collapsed. "So everything was a lie?" "Not everything," he said, his gaze heavy, "but the beginning, yes." Sarah grabbed my hand. She was crying. "Let's go, Ethan. Now." Richard took a step. "Ethan." I looked at him. "You used my hunger, my fear, my hope. You broke me." "No," he whispered. "I built you." I looked at Sarah, I looked at Richard, and in that moment I understood there was no happy ending, only choices. I'm leaving." Richard lowered his eyes. Sarah pulled me toward the door, but before we left, he spoke. "If you walk away, never come back." I paused but kept walking. The sound of my footsteps was the last echo Richard heard in that office, and maybe the sound of the last person he'd ever love, walking away. The following days were a blur. Sarah and I hid in a small abandoned apartment in Queens, cracked walls, creaky wooden floors, but there we were free, or at least that's what I tried to believe. "He's going to find us," Sarah said, sitting in the corner of the room, hugging her knees. "I'm nothing to him anymore," I replied, trying to convince myself. But deep down, I knew. Richard Callahan didn't leave loose ends. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night. Sarah wasn't in the bedroom. I found her on the balcony, looking out at the city. "Can't sleep." She looked at me. Her eyes seemed even more tired. "I'm scared." "Of what?" She took a long time to answer. "Of you." That paralyzed me. "What do you mean?" "You talk like him now, Ethan. You walk like him. Think like him." Her voice cracked. "I'm afraid of losing you. To him, even from a distance." I tried to hold her, but she pulled away. "I just wanted the boy who used to share scraps of food with me on the sidewalk." I lowered my head, because maybe that boy no longer existed. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Sarah's eyes widened. "Ethan, don't open it." But I did. It wasn't Richard. It was worse. "Hello, Ethan," Victoria said, the lawyer, cold, precise. "How did you find us?" I asked, throat tightening. "Richard didn't. I did." Sarah ran to my side. "What do you want?" Victoria smiled, a smile without life. "A message. If you don't come back, someone you love will pay." "That's a threat? It's reality. Why? Why won't he leave me alone?" Victoria stepped closer, her eyes cruel. "Because you're the only mistake he refuses to lose." I trembled. Sarah grabbed my hand, but it was ice cold. "What happens if I don't go back?" Victoria looked directly at Sarah. "Someone you love disappears." Sarah choked back a scream. "Get out!" I shouted, desperate. Victoria backed away, but before turning the corner, she said, "You have until tomorrow," and disappeared down the hallway. I closed the door, my knees giving way. Sarah collapsed into tears. "Ethan, I don't want to die." I didn't either, but more than that, I didn't want to lose her. And that's when I realized I didn't have a choice. Either I went back or he would take her from me. I stayed awake the whole night. Sarah slept on the makeshift mattress, or pretended to. Fear doesn't let anyone truly sleep. I knew what I had to do. When the sun started to rise, I left. Without saying a word. I arrived at Callahan Corp before 7. The lights in the top floor were already on. He was there, waiting. When I entered the office, Richard didn't even look up. "I knew you'd come," he said coldly. I said nothing, just walked to the window. The city outside looked like a concrete prison. "You sent Victoria to threaten Sarah." I did what had to be done. I turned around, my eyes burning with rage. "You've become exactly the man you said I shouldn't be." He looked at me, but something was different. There was no fight left in him. "I never lied about what I am, Ethan." "No, you only lied about what you wanted from me." Silence. "You wanted me to become the next monster, so you could ease your guilt over losing your son." He didn't deny it. The tears he didn't shed said everything. "You never wanted to save me. You wanted to replace him." His breathing faltered. "If I lose you, I lose everything." I shook my head, feeling my heart shatter. "Then you've already lost." He stepped forward, tried to reach for me. "Ethan, don't do this." But I stepped back. "I'm not your son, Richard." That sentence broke something inside him. He fell to his knees. "Forgive me." I'd never heard that word from him before, and in that moment, I understood. Richard Callahan wasn't a monster. He was just a broken man, trying to fix a past that would never come back. But I couldn't be the price of his redemption. I took a deep breath. "The only thing I can give you is goodbye." I turned my back, and even hearing his muffled sobs behind me, I kept walking. At the exit, Victoria was waiting. "You finished him," she said, almost admiring. I stopped. "No, he finished himself," and I walked away, knowing that in that building for the first time, Richard Callahan was truly alone. But my victory had a price, and I'd soon find out what it was. I went back to Sarah that same night. She was sitting in the corner of the room, hugging herself. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, you came back." I simply knelt in front of her and said, "It's over." She hugged me like she never wanted to let go. "Are you safe now?" "I don't know, but we're together." She cried on my shoulder, and I cried too, because for the first time, I didn't have to pretend to be strong. 2 weeks passed. Richard Callahan disappeared. The company kept running. Victoria took control. But his name vanished from the headlines, from conversations, from the city, as if he had never existed. Sarah and I tried to start over, slowly. I found a job in a small coffee shop. Nothing glamorous, but honest. And somehow, it made me feel truly alive. One morning, while wiping tables, an envelope was left at the counter. No sender. Inside was just a handwritten letter. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you chose to live. Not the way I wanted, but the way you needed. Thank you for saving me, and without knowing, for teaching me to be human again. Everything I built, I left for you. Not in money, in choices. Live better than I did. R." At the bottom of the envelope, a small keychain, the same one his son used to carry in that photo on his desk, and in that moment I understood he had left, not to escape, but to forgive himself. I put the keychain in my pocket. Sarah noticed my tears and asked, "What is it?" I just answered, "Nothing. I just finally understood what a life is worth." She smiled, a sad smile, but real, and together we moved on. No fortune, no fame, but free, and for the first time, seen. My name is still Ethan Miller, and maybe that's the only thing I didn't lose. If you asked me today who I am, I wouldn't really know how to answer, but I know who I'm not. I'm not the invisible kid who begged for scraps on New York streets, and I'm not the heir to an empire built on broken hearts. I'm someone who chose to live on his own terms. You know, sometimes we think we need money, power, or recognition to be someone, but we don't. The true worth of a life isn't in what you own, it's in who walks beside you. I almost sold my soul to a man who only knew how to measure the world in numbers, but in the end, I realized his biggest mistake was believing that love and redemption could be bought. And maybe my biggest mistake was believing that too. Sarah saved me, with her patience, with her pain, with her courage to tell me the truth when I didn't want to hear it. So, if you've made it this far, listening to me, I'll ask you just one thing. Value those who walk beside you, and never accept being invisible. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched your heart, leave a comment. I want to hear your story too. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that there's still hope. There's always hope. Even for someone who was once just a street kid.